The woman was still breathing when the cruiser exploded into the ditch, but whoever had done it had made sure she would not be for long. The sound hit first. A hollow metallic scream, steel folding on itself, then the wet thud of a body sliding across asphalt. Headlights flickered, died, then came back weak and crooked, aimed at the cornfields like blind eyes. By the time the engine stopped ticking, the road had gone silent again, the kind of silence that only exists far from cities, where no one is coming unless they already know you are dying. Caleb Holt saw the badge before he saw her. It lay near the shoulder, half buried in gravel, its edge catching the beam of his motorcycle light. He slowed without thinking, boots skimming the pavement, the bike settling beneath him like a tired animal. The rain had just started, thin and cold, tapping against his helmet. He had planned to be home 10 minutes earlier. He would think about that later. The cruiser sat at an angle that made no sense. Front end crushed, rear intact. No skid marks, no debris trail. It looked placed, not crashed. Caleb killed the engine. The quiet rushed in. Wind through corn, distant thunder, his own breathing louder than it should have been. She lay across the center line, one arm bent wrong, dark hair plastered to her face. Blood spread from beneath her temple, thin at first, then thicker as the rain diluted it and carried it down the yellow paint. Her chest moved, barely. A shallow hitch every few seconds, like her body was arguing with itself about whether to continue. He knelt beside her. 2 fingers at her neck. A pulse answered, weak, uneven. "Stay with me," he said, though he had no idea if she could hear him. Her eyes fluttered. One opened halfway, gray, focusless. Her mouth moved, no sound coming out. Caleb reached for the radio clipped to her shoulder. Static. He shook it, adjusted the dial. Nothing. He pulled his phone. 1 bar flickered, then vanished. He dialed anyway. The call didn't even ring. This was not an accident. Every instinct he had learned the hard way told him that. He could leave. Plenty of people would have. A man like him especially. He was used to being a shadow in places like this, passing through without being remembered. He had worked a long time to earn that invisibility. Instead, he pulled off his jacket and slid it beneath her head, slow and careful. The leather was old, broken in, softer than it looked. Her breathing hitched as he moved her, then steadied again. "You're not done," he murmured. "Not tonight." He pressed his phone again. No signal. He looked down the road, then back toward the fields. Nothing. No houses, no porch lights, no witnesses. Whoever had done this had chosen the spot well. Caleb hesitated for half a second, then tapped a contact he hadn't used in years. The line connected on the second ring. "I need you," he said. No explanation, no names. There was a pause, then a voice rough with age and sleep. "Where?" He gave the mile marker. "I'm on my way," the voice said. Then after a beat, "Do I call the others?" Caleb looked down at the woman. Her lips were turning pale. Her hand twitched once, fingers scraping weakly at the road. "Yes," he said, "but quiet." The call ended. The rain picked up. Caleb pulled her arm closer to her body, checked the wound at her head. Deep, but clean. No glass, no steering wheel imprint. Another thing that didn't fit. He tore a strip from his shirt and pressed it against the gash. She groaned, a sound more felt than heard. "Easy," he said. "I've got you." Minutes passed, then more. Time stretched and compressed in strange ways, like it always did when someone's life was draining out in front of you. The first headlight appeared from the south, low and steady. Then another, and another. They didn't come all at once. They came the way people who had learned patience came, one by one. Engines idling low, headlights angled away from the road, men dismounting without speaking, boots hitting wet pavement with deliberate care. Franklin Reed arrived first, 68 years old, Vietnam veteran, former county fire chief. He took in the scene with one glance, then knelt beside Caleb without a word. He checked the woman's pulse, her pupils, the wound at her head. "She's crashing," Frank said quietly. "We don't move her yet." Caleb nodded. He trusted Frank with his life. Had, once. More bikes arrived. Not a crowd, a pattern. They positioned themselves at the edges of the road, engines forming a low, steady hum. 2 men took the north end, 2 the south. Someone put out flares, shielding them from view of the highway bend half a mile away. A man with a gray beard and a cane leaned in close. "Radio's dead," he said. "Phones too." Frank's jaw tightened. That figures. They worked without being told. Hands moved. Jackets came off. A thermal blanket appeared from a saddlebag. Someone aimed a flashlight, steady and low, so it wouldn't blind her if she woke again. Caleb felt it then, the weight of it. The thing he had spent decades outrunning had found him anyway. Not the club, not the past. Something bigger. Something that didn't want witnesses. The woman's breathing grew shallow. Frank adjusted the pressure at her head. "Stay with us, deputy," he said, reading the name patch on her uniform. "You're doing fine." Her lips moved again. This time sound came out, a whisper. "They..." Turned off, Frank leaned closer. "Who did?" Her eyes rolled back before she could answer. In the distance, sirens finally cut through the rain. Too far. Still minutes away. Too many minutes. Caleb stood and scanned the darkness. He felt it before he saw it, the way you feel a storm shift before the wind hits. A vehicle moving slow, lights off, somewhere beyond the fields. He stepped back into the circle, his face hard. "We've got company," he said. Frank didn't look up. Then they picked the wrong night. The sirens grew louder. Red and blue strobed against the rain. The men around them held their ground, silent, unmoving, not defiant, protective. Caleb looked down at the woman again, blood on his hands, her life hanging by a thread. Somewhere behind the fear and the urgency, another truth settled into place, cold and clear. Whoever had put her in the road had underestimated 2 things: how long men like him remembered their training, and how far they would go when someone tried to erase a life in the dark. The first deputy car crested the bend with its lights already spinning, red and blue washing over leather, rain, and the pale face on the asphalt like a warning nobody had asked for. The cruiser slowed hard when the driver saw the ring of motorcycles. Tires hissed, brakes squealed. The deputy inside sat frozen for half a breath too long, eyes flicking from patch to patch, counting bodies, counting engines. His door opened anyway, training over fear, or pride, hard to tell. "What's going on here?" he called, voice tight, hand resting near his holster without quite committing. Frank didn't stand. He didn't raise his voice. He stayed kneeling beside the woman, fingers steady at her neck. "Deputy down," he said. "Head trauma. Pulse is weak. Radio's dead." The younger deputy hesitated, then stepped closer. He took in the flares, the blanket, the pressure bandage already dark with blood. He swallowed. "Ambulance is 2 minutes out." Caleb watched the tree line, not the deputy. He could feel eyes on them from somewhere unseen. The rain carried sound oddly, flattening distance, hiding movement. A second cruiser arrived, then a third. Doors opened, radios crackled. The posture of the officers shifted from alarm to something else. Calculation, recognition. Not all fear was born equal. A tall man stepped out of the last car, broad shoulders under a rain-soaked jacket, silver hair plastered to his head, captain insignia on his collar. He stopped at the edge of the light, hands on his hips, surveying the scene like a problem he hadn't expected to solve tonight. "Captain Reeves," Frank said without looking up. Reeves' eyes narrowed. He hadn't spoken yet. That Frank knew his name bothered him more than the bikes. "Who's in charge here?" Reeves asked. Frank pressed harder on the bandage as the woman's breathing stuttered. "Right now?" He nodded toward her. "She is." Reeves' jaw tightened. He stepped closer, boots splashing. "I appreciate the assistance, but you need to clear the road." Caleb turned then, slow, deliberate. He met Reeves' gaze and held it. No challenge, no apology, just presence. "She dies if we move her wrong," Caleb said. EMS can take it from here. Until then, nobody touches her." For a moment it looked like Reeves might push it. His eyes flicked to the patches, the ages, the scars. He did the math. He exhaled through his nose. "Fine," he said, "but I want names." Frank finally stood. Water ran off his beard in thin lines. "You'll get them," he said, "after she's breathing on her own." The ambulance arrived in a wash of white light and diesel. Paramedics moved fast, professional, grateful for the space the bikes made without being asked. They knelt, checked vitals, slid a collar into place. One of them glanced up at Frank. "Nice work," she said quietly. Frank nodded once. As they lifted the woman onto the stretcher, her eyes opened again. This time they focused. They locked on Caleb's face. Something passed between them then. Recognition, maybe. Or fear. Her lips moved. "Truck," she whispered. "No lights." Then she was gone again, sedated, wheeled toward the ambulance. Reeves watched her doors close. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did. He turned back to the group, rain streaking his face. "You," he said, pointing at Caleb. "Step forward." Caleb did. He felt the weight of the moment settle on his shoulders. He had carried heavier things. "Name?" Reeves asked. "Caleb Holt." Reeves wrote it down. "You're lucky she lived," he said. "You're also lucky we don't have a problem here." Caleb met his gaze again. "We don't," he said. Reeves snorted softly. "We'll see." The bikes dispersed the way they had come. Quiet, orderly. No revving, no speeches. The road emptied, leaving only rain and the faint smell of fuel. Caleb waited until the last headlight vanished before swinging his leg over his bike. As he pulled onto the road, he saw a dark shape ease back into the fields, tires whispering through wet grass. He memorized the angle, the direction, the way it vanished too cleanly. At the hospital, the fluorescent lights were unforgiving. They flattened everything, made time thick and slow. Caleb sat on a plastic chair, helmet at his feet, hands still stained dark beneath the sink water that refused to run clear. Frank stood beside him, arms crossed. "You hear what she said?" "Truck," Caleb said. "No lights." Frank nodded. "Same as last year. County road, same bend. Hit and run that never went anywhere." Caleb looked up. "Never went anywhere because?" Frank's mouth twitched. "Because it wasn't supposed to." Across the hall, Reeves spoke in low tones with a man in a suit who didn't belong. The suit nodded, took notes, never once looked at Caleb. A nurse approached. "She's stable," she said. "For now." Caleb let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Hours later, the sun threatened the horizon with a weak, gray light. The hospital doors slid open and shut, open and shut. Life continued, indifferent. Reeves found Caleb by the vending machines. "You should go home," he said. "Get some rest." Caleb studied him. The man's collar was crisp. His eyes weren't. "I will," he said, "after I know she's safe." Reeves' lips pressed thin. "She's a deputy. We take care of our own." Caleb's voice stayed even. "So do we." Reeves held his stare a second too long, then turned away. By mid-morning, the story had already started to mutate. Phones buzzed, screens lit up. A photo of the bikes around the road made its way onto local feeds. Comments piled up. Shock, praise, suspicion. Caleb left through a side exit, raincoat pulled low. In the parking lot, a patrol car rolled past him, slow, deliberate. The officer inside stared openly. At his garage, the door was ajar. Caleb froze. He stepped inside, heart pounding, senses sharp. Nothing moved. Tools were where he'd left them, but the desk drawer was open, papers disturbed. A single card lay on the workbench. No name, no logo, just a number written in block letters. Caleb didn't touch it. He stared at it until the meaning settled in his bones. They knew where to find him. Across town, in a quiet hospital room, the woman stirred. Machines beeped softly. Her head throbbed. She turned her face toward the window, where dawn painted the sky a pale, uncertain blue. A shadow crossed the glass. Then another. She tried to focus, tried to remember. The image of a man kneeling in the rain surfaced. Leather jacket, steady hands, a voice telling her to stay. Her heart rate spiked. Somewhere down the hall, a monitor chimed. Outside, a dark truck rolled past the hospital with its lights off, then disappeared into traffic as if it had never been there at all. By the time the sun fully cleared the fields, the story had already chosen its sides. Caleb Holt stood in his garage with the door half raised, letting the morning air push out the smell of oil and rain. The card on the workbench stayed where it was. He hadn't touched it, didn't need to. The number had burned itself into his head the moment he saw it. Clean ink, heavy stock, not local, not a prank. Someone wanted him aware, not scared yet, just aware. Outside, a cruiser rolled past again, slower this time. The officer inside didn't pretend not to look. Caleb met his eyes and held them. The cruiser kept going. Frank arrived just after 7, his old pickup coughing as it pulled in. He took one look at Caleb's face and then at the card. "They come inside?" Frank asked. "Far enough," Caleb said. Frank nodded. He didn't ask who. Men like them didn't waste questions on answers they already knew. Across town, the hospital had shifted from chaos to routine, but the room at the end of the hall stayed guarded. Deputy Laura Bennett lay still beneath thin sheets, a web of wires and tubes keeping time for her body. 57 years old, divorced, 2 grown sons who lived states away. 23 years on the force, most of them quiet, reliable, unremarkable. The kind of officer nobody noticed until something went wrong. Captain Reeves stood at the foot of her bed, hands clasped behind his back. His voice was low, calm, practiced. "You're safe now," he said. "Take it easy. Doctors say memory gaps are normal." Laura tried to speak. Her throat burned. Reeves leaned closer. "Don't push it," he added gently. "We'll talk later." She nodded, though something in her chest tightened. Safe felt like the wrong word. When Reeves stepped out, a younger detective took his place. Mark Ellison, early 40s, clean cut, careful eyes. He smiled, but it didn't reach them. "Do you remember anything?" he asked. Laura stared at the ceiling. Rain, headlights, pain, then leather, hands that didn't shake. "There was a truck," she said slowly. "No lights. It came up fast." Ellison's pen paused. "And before that?" She hesitated. The memory slid away when she reached for it. "I don't know." Ellison nodded. "That's okay, trauma does that." He didn't mention the bikers. Neither did Reeves when he returned. But Laura could feel their absence, the shape of the question left hanging in the room. By noon, the county had opinions. A local radio host called it reckless interference. A retired EMT called it a miracle. Social feeds split cleanly down the middle, lines drawn by fear and familiarity. Leather jackets meant danger to some. To others, they meant veterans, old roads, men who had shown up when nobody else could. Caleb stayed off the air. He worked. He cleaned tools that didn't need cleaning. He rebuilt an engine that wasn't broken. Every sound outside made his shoulders tighten. At 2 in the afternoon, the phone rang, the number on the card. Caleb answered without speaking. "You made things complicated," a voice said. "Calm, educated, not local." "She's alive," Caleb replied. A pause. "That wasn't the plan." Caleb felt the words settle, cold and heavy. "Plans change." "Not often," the voice said. "Men like you usually understand that." Caleb looked at the door, at the street beyond it. "If you're calling to scare me, you're late." Another pause. Then a soft exhale, almost amused. "We're calling to see how reasonable you are." The line went dead. Frank watched Caleb hang up. "That bad?" "Worse," Caleb said. That night, Laura woke screaming. The dream came hard and fast, headlights filling her mirror, the sound of an engine pushed too hard. A weightless moment. Then pain. She sat up, gasping, fingers clawing at the sheets. A nurse rushed in, then another. When Laura finally calmed, her eyes landed on the window. For a second, she thought she saw a shape move outside, too large to be a shadow, too still to be a person. "Did someone just leave?" she asked. The nurse shook her head. "No one but staff." Laura didn't argue, but the feeling didn't leave. Across town, Caleb locked the garage and killed the lights. He didn't go home. He rode. Slow roads, back ways. He needed to know if he was being followed. He was. The truck kept its distance, always there when he checked his mirrors, always gone when he slowed too much. It didn't chase. It paced. Caleb turned down a gravel road and cut his lights. The bike rolled to a stop. He waited, counted his breath. 1, 2, 3. The truck rolled past moments later, black and featureless, exactly where it shouldn't have been. Caleb memorized it. Again. The next morning, Reeves called a press briefing. He stood in front of the county seal, voice firm, reassuring. "We are following all leads," he said. "At this time, there is no evidence of foul play." Laura watched from her hospital bed, jaw tight. No evidence. She knew what she'd felt. She knew what she'd seen. Reeves continued. "We appreciate the concern from the community. We ask everyone to let law enforcement do its job." The camera cut away. Frank shut off the television. "He's lying," he said. Caleb nodded. "And he's nervous." "Good," Frank said. "Means we're close." Caleb didn't answer. He was thinking about the call, about the word plan, about how many people had died because they were in the wrong place when someone decided the plan mattered more than a life. At the hospital, Laura swung her legs over the side of the bed. Her head throbbed, but her resolve felt solid. She pressed the call button. "I want my report," she told the nurse when she arrived. "The full one, and I want to speak to someone not under Captain Reeves." The nurse hesitated, then nodded. Down in the parking lot, a black truck idled with its lights off. And for the first time since the rain-soaked road, the truth began to push back. By the fourth day, the town no longer whispered. It talked, loudly, in diners, on front porches, through cracked windows and open radios. And every version of the story bent a little more away from the truth. Caleb Holt heard it when he stopped for gas just outside town. Two men by the pumps, both in their 70s, ball caps pulled low, voices rough with age and certainty. "They say those bikers boxed her in," one said. "Wouldn't let deputies through." "Figures," the other replied. "You let men like that hang around, something bad's bound to happen." Caleb paid in cash and said nothing. He rode away with the words sitting heavy in his chest, familiar as an old scar. He had lived his whole life inside that assumption. Leather meant trouble. Silence meant guilt. And if something went wrong near a man like him, the math was already done. At the hospital, Laura Bennett lay awake, staring at a hairline crack in the ceiling tile above her bed. She had traced it so many times she could see it with her eyes closed. The pain in her head came in waves now, duller than before but constant, like a warning she couldn't turn off. The door opened softly. Captain Reeves stepped in, carrying a paper cup of coffee he didn't offer her. "You're healing well," he said. "Doctor's pleased." Laura shifted slightly, testing her balance. "I asked for my report." Reeves smiled. It was the kind of smile that used to put her at ease. It didn't anymore. "I told you, internal review takes time." "You told the press there was no evidence of foul play," she said. "That's not the same thing." Reeves set the coffee down on the counter without drinking it. "Words matter, Laura, especially right now." Her eyes narrowed. "So does the truth." Reeves leaned against the wall, crossing his arms. "You were hurt, you're confused, and you were found surrounded by people who don't exactly inspire confidence." She felt it then, the pressure. Not shouted, not forced, just nudged, like a door closing slowly. "They saved my life," she said. Reeves didn't deny it. "Maybe, or maybe they made sure you lived long enough to tell the story they wanted." Laura's pulse picked up. The monitor chirped softly. "You're planting ideas," she said. "I'm protecting you," Reeves replied. and this department. When he left, the room felt smaller. Across town, Frank Reed stood in the back room of the volunteer fire station, staring at a wall of old photographs. Men in uniform, some smiling, some not. He had buried 3 of them. He turned when Caleb came in. "They're turning it," Frank said, "slow and steady." Caleb nodded. "That's how they always do." Frank picked up a folded piece of paper from the table. "County council meeting tonight. Reeves will be there." Caleb met his eyes. "So will I." Frank hesitated. "That's not smart." Caleb's mouth twitched. Neither was stopping on that road. The meeting hall was packed. Folding chairs scraped against the floor. Voices overlapped. Someone had brought cookies. Someone else had brought anger. Reeves stood at the front, flanked by 2 deputies. He spoke calmly, about patience, about process, about trust. Then someone shouted from the back, "Why won't you release the report?" Reeves raised a hand. "Because speculation helps no one." Caleb felt eyes turn toward him before he realized he had stood. He hadn't planned it. His body had moved on its own. "I found her," he said. The room went quiet. Not respectful, curious, suspicious. "She was bleeding out," Caleb continued. "No signal, no response. If we hadn't stopped, she'd be dead." Reeves' voice cut in smooth and sharp. "Sir, this is not the place." Caleb looked at him. "It is if you're lying." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Reeves's jaw tightened. "That's a serious accusation." "So is saying nothing happened when it did," Caleb replied. Reeves stepped forward. "You don't wear a badge." "No," Caleb said, "but I know what a staged crash looks like." That did it. Reeves's face hardened. "This meeting is over." 2 deputies moved closer to Caleb, hands out, not touching yet. The crowd buzzed, divided, uncertain. Someone yelled for him to sit down. Someone else told Reeves to answer the question. Caleb didn't resist when they guided him toward the door. He didn't need to. The damage was done. Doubt had entered the room, and doubt was harder to remove than any man. Outside, night had settled in thick and warm. Caleb walked toward his bike. He felt it before he heard it. The shift. The hum of an engine that didn't belong. The truck came out of nowhere. It surged from a side street, lights still off, engine roaring now. Too fast. Too close. Caleb ran. The truck clipped his bike, sending it skidding across the pavement. Pain exploded through his shoulder as he hit the ground. He rolled, gasping, hearing the crunch of metal, the shout of someone behind him. The truck stopped 10 feet away. Door opened. Boots hit pavement. Caleb pushed himself up on one elbow. His vision blurred. The figure approached, face hidden in shadow. "This was your warning," the voice said, same as the phone. Calm. Certain. A shout rang out. Someone running. The figure stepped back, into the truck, gone as fast as it had come. Caleb lay there, breath ragged, staring at the stars. Blood ran down his arm, warm and slick. At the hospital, Laura jerked awake as her monitor spiked. She swung her legs over the bed again, ignoring the protest in her head. Something was wrong. She could feel it. Same way she'd felt it in her cruiser before the impact. She reached for the phone on the bedside table, scrolled. Found a number she hadn't expected to use again. Frank answered on the first ring. "It's Laura Bennett," she said. "They're lying." Frank didn't ask who. "They tried to kill him," she continued. "Didn't they?" Frank closed his eyes. "Yes." "I want out," Laura said. "Out of Reeves' chain. Out of the story they're writing." Frank's voice was steady. "That comes with a cost." Laura swallowed. "So does staying quiet." In the darkness outside the hospital, a black truck rolled past, slower this time. Watching. And for the first time, 2 people on opposite sides of a line they hadn't chosen were moving toward the same truth, knowing full well it would not let them walk away clean. By morning, Caleb Holt's name had made it into the paper. Not the front page, not yet. Page 3, beneath the weather and above a church bake sale. Former biker questions official account of deputy crash. No photo, no context. Just enough ink to turn him into a problem people could point at without knowing why. Caleb read it with his left arm strapped tight against his ribs, the sling cutting into his neck. The doctor had called it a clean fracture. Lucky. He didn't feel lucky. He felt hunted. Frank's garage smelled like antiseptic and old coffee. Frank moved around him in silence, the way men did when they were thinking too hard to talk. He tightened the wrap around Caleb's shoulder, checked the stitches, then stepped back. "They meant that one," Frank said. Caleb nodded. "They won't miss again." Frank poured coffee into chipped mugs. "Then we stop waiting." Across town, Laura Bennett sat upright in her hospital bed, the television muted. The image still flickered. Captain Reeves at a podium, calm, controlled, explaining that rumors were harmful, that emotions were high, that investigations took time. He never once said her name. A nurse entered with medication. Laura waited until she left before reaching under her pillow. The burner phone Frank had slipped her the night before was still there. Cold, heavy, real. She dialed once, then hung up. Fear had a way of dressing itself up as patience. She refused to let it win. In the parking lot below, an unmarked sedan idled for 30 minutes before pulling away. Laura swung her legs off the bed and stood. The room tilted. She steadied herself on the rail, breathing through the pain. The doctor had said another day. Reeves had said a week. Neither of them knew what she knew now. Someone inside her own department was orchestrating this, and they were not careful. They were confident. Confidence made men sloppy. Caleb spent the afternoon answering questions he didn't owe anyone. A deputy stopped by Frank's garage, friendly on the surface, eyes too alert. Asked where Caleb had been the night of the meeting. Asked who else had been there. Asked why a man with his history felt entitled to accuse a captain. Caleb answered just enough to sound cooperative. He had learned that skill a long time ago. When the deputy left, Frank locked the door. "They're fishing." Caleb flexed his fingers. "Then let's give them something to bite." They drove out to the old county maintenance yard just after dusk. It had been decommissioned years ago, forgotten except by people who needed to be forgotten themselves. Frank parked behind a line of rusted salt trucks. They killed the lights and waited. The black truck arrived exactly when Caleb expected it to. No headlights, no hesitation. It rolled through the open gate like it belonged there. Caleb watched it stop beside a storage building with peeling paint and a new lock. A man stepped out, then another. Both moved with practiced efficiency. Neither looked around. Frank whispered, "You sure?" Caleb nodded. "That's them." They didn't rush in. They didn't confront. They watched, learned, counted seconds. When the men left, Caleb pulled out his phone and took photos through the fence. Grainy, incomplete, enough to matter later. As they drove away, Caleb's phone buzzed. Unknown number. He didn't answer. The voicemail came seconds later. A woman's voice this time, smooth, measured. "You don't know how deep this goes. Walk away." Caleb deleted it without listening again. At the hospital, Laura pressed her call button. When the nurse arrived, Laura smiled, polite and exhausted. "I need to use the restroom," she said. The nurse helped her stand, turned her back for half a second. That was all Laura needed. She slipped the burner phone into her gown pocket and made for the stairwell. Each step sent fire through her head, but she kept moving. Down 3 floors, out a side door. The cool air hit her like a slap. Frank's pickup was waiting. Laura climbed in and shut the door with shaking hands. Frank pulled away without a word. They drove in silence until the hospital lights faded behind them. "Caleb?" Laura asked finally. "He's alive," Frank said. "Barely." Laura closed her eyes. Relief and guilt tangled together in her chest. "They want him quiet." "So do we," Frank replied. "Just for different reasons." They reached the fire station just as night settled in. Caleb stood when Laura walked in. Slowly, carefully. The room felt smaller with the two of them in it. "You shouldn't be here," Caleb said. Laura met his eyes. "Neither should you." For a moment, neither spoke. Then Laura took a breath and said the words she had been holding back since the crash. It wasn't random. Caleb nodded. We know. I was following a shipment, she continued. Equipment flagged as destroyed. It wasn't. I logged it. Someone noticed. Frank leaned against the wall, arms crossed. Reeves? Laura hesitated. I don't know, but he shut it down fast. Too fast. Caleb felt something shift. The shape of the enemy grew clearer. Then this isn't about you or me, he said. It's about what you saw. And what you interrupted, Laura replied. Outside, an engine turned over. Then another. Frank glanced toward the door. We've got maybe days, not weeks. Laura straightened. Pain flared. She ignored it. Then we move first. Caleb studied her. The woman he had found broken in the road was gone. This one was sharp, focused, dangerous in a way that didn't need weapons. You understand what this costs? He said. Laura nodded. I already paid some of it. The fire station radio crackled to life unexpectedly. Frank turned it down, but not before a familiar voice slipped through. Captain Reeves, calm, authoritative, calling for information, asking for cooperation, promising protection. Caleb laughed once. No humor in it. They always promise that, he said. Laura reached into her pocket and placed the burner phone on the table. This number called me, she said, before you were hit. Caleb's jaw tightened. Then they're closer than they should be. Frank looked at the phone, then at both of them. We're past quiet now. Outside, tires crunched on gravel. Headlights swept across the building, then cut off. Caleb reached for the wrench by the door, old reflexes waking up. Laura didn't move. She listened. Footsteps approached. One set. Heavy. Familiar. The door opened. Captain Reeves stepped inside, rain dripping from his coat, eyes scanning the room. He took in the sling, the uniform, the phone on the table. Well, he said softly, this is unfortunate. And in that moment, every line they had been skirting snapped into place, the story revealing itself not with a scream, but with the quiet certainty that the man standing in front of them had never intended for any of them to walk away. Captain Reeves closed the door behind him with deliberate care, as if the sound itself needed to be controlled. The latch clicked. Final. The room smelled of oil, old smoke, and tension that had nowhere to go. No one's arresting anyone, Reeves said, palms open, voice calm. Let's not turn a bad situation into something irreversible. Caleb didn't lower the wrench. His arm screamed in protest, but he held it anyway. Frank shifted one step closer to the radio, not touching it, just close enough to remind everyone it existed. Laura broke the silence. You came alone, she said. Reeves smiled faintly. Did I? The question hung there, heavy. Outside, an engine idled somewhere beyond the bay doors, then cut. Another door opened. Closed. Soft footsteps. More than one. Frank's eyes flicked to the side window. He counted reflections. 2. Maybe 3. Reeves followed his gaze and nodded. I told them to wait. This stays professional. Caleb let out a short breath. Funny word choice. Reeves ignored him. He turned to Laura, voice softening, almost paternal. You scared people. You went off script. That happens after trauma. You stole my uniform, Laura said. Reeves didn't flinch. Evidence control. You threatened witnesses. Risk management. You tried to have him killed, she said, nodding at Caleb. That gave Reeves pause. Just a fraction. Enough. I tried to stop a problem from becoming a scandal, he said. There's a difference. Caleb laughed. It came out rough. That's what every man says when the bodies start stacking. Reeves' eyes hardened. You don't know what you interrupted. Then explain it, Laura said. Slow, clear, like you taught us. Reeves looked at her for a long moment. Something like regret passed across his face, then vanished. Equipment goes missing all the time. Paperwork lags. Sometimes things get rerouted. That's not corruption, that's reality. Laura shook her head. I logged serials, matching crates. Same shipment flagged, destroyed 3 times. Reeves' jaw tightened. You were supposed to let that go. I couldn't, she said. People get hurt when we let things go. Reeves stepped closer. People get hurt when we don't. The words landed with weight. Frank straightened. You're not the only one who's buried friends, he said quietly. Reeves glanced at him. And you are? Someone who knows the smell of a cover-up, Frank replied. It smells like this. Outside, a radio squawked. Reeves lifted a hand without turning. The sound died. Caleb lowered the wrench a few inches. Not trust. Calculation. You didn't plan on me stopping, he said. That's what this is really about. Reeves met his gaze. You were never supposed to be there. Laura felt it click. The timing. The dead radio. The empty stretch of road. You knew where I'd be, she said. Reeves didn't answer. You set the road, she continued. The lights, the signal. You expected a clean hit and a report written after. Reeves's silence confirmed it more loudly than any confession. You miscalculated, Caleb said. You forgot some of us still stop. Reeves exhaled slowly. You're old enough to understand this, he said to Caleb. So are you, he added to Frank. Systems don't survive on ideals. They survive on control. Laura stepped forward despite the pain slicing through her skull. No, she said. They survive on trust, and you burned it. Reeves's voice sharpened. Trust doesn't keep towns safe. Order does. Frank reached behind him and flipped a switch. The radio crackled to life, louder than before. Reeves turned, eyes flashing. You want to threaten us in our own house? Frank asked. Say it on the air. Reeves moved fast then, too fast for a man his age. He lunged for the radio. Caleb reacted on instinct. He swung the wrench, not at Reeves' head, but at his wrist. The metal clanged. Reeves cried out, stumbling back, clutching his arm. The bay doors slammed open. 2 men rushed in, plain clothes, hard faces. One reached for his waistband. Laura's voice cut through the chaos. State police are on their way. The men froze. Reeves stared at her. You don't have proof. Laura pulled the burner phone from her pocket and placed it on the table. I recorded everything since you walked in. Reeves's expression collapsed inward. Rage, then calculation, then something colder. You won't make it to trial, he said. None of you. Sirens wailed in the distance. Not close yet. Close enough. Frank smiled without warmth. That's the sound of men who don't answer to you. The plainclothesmen backed away slowly. Reeves straightened, pain etched across his face, but his voice steady. This doesn't end with me. Caleb nodded. We know. Reeves turned and walked out. The others followed. No one moved until the engines outside started and faded into the night. Laura sagged against the table. Caleb caught her before she fell. For a moment, the world narrowed to breath and heartbeat. That was stupid, Caleb said softly. Laura managed a thin smile. So was stopping on that road. The sirens grew louder now. Red and blue washed over the walls, the floor, their faces. Frank looked at both of them. From here on out, it's daylight. Caleb stared at the open door, the darkness beyond it thinner than it had been an hour ago. Daylight's when things get judged. Laura straightened. Then let them judge. Outside, the police cars pulled in. Doors opened. Commands were shouted. The world rushed back in. And somewhere, already adapting, already planning, the system that Reeves had served began deciding who else would pay before this was over. Daylight did not bring clarity. It brought lines. Lines drawn in ink, in uniforms, in the careful language of men who knew exactly how much truth the public could swallow at once. By noon, the fire station was sealed off with yellow tape. State police cruisers idled outside. Men in pressed jackets moved through the building with quiet authority, collecting statements, tagging evidence, photographing the table where the phone still lay like a loaded weapon no one wanted to touch. Caleb sat on a metal folding chair, sling tight against his chest, eyes forward. He answered questions slowly. Names, times, words spoken. He gave nothing extra. He had learned long ago that extra was where they buried you. Laura sat across from him, wrapped in a blanket that smelled like smoke and disinfectant. Her face was pale, but her eyes were clear. Too clear. The kind of clarity that came when denial finally burned away and left nothing but resolve. A state investigator with graying temples closed his notebook. "You understand," he said to Laura, "that what you're alleging reaches beyond this county." "I understand," Laura replied. "That's why I didn't bring it to this county." The man studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. Respect, or at least acknowledgement. Outside, a small crowd had gathered. Not bikers, locals, retirees, a pair of farmers still in boots and denim, a woman from the diner holding a paper cup of coffee she hadn't touched. They stood quietly, watching, waiting to see which way the wind would turn. A news van rolled in just after 1 in the afternoon, then another. Cameras came out, microphones followed, questions floated through the air like gnats. Is it true a police captain threatened civilians? Were outlaw bikers involved in a cover-up? Is the deputy fabricating her account? Caleb watched from the doorway, jaw tight. The story was already slipping out of his hands, reshaping itself into something louder, uglier, easier to sell. Frank stood beside him. "They'll chew on this for weeks," he said. "Or choke on it," Caleb replied. At 3:30, the call came. Reeves had turned himself in. Not to the county, to the state. Walked into a regional office 2 towns over with a lawyer and a statement already prepared. Calm. Cooperative. Claiming misunderstanding. Stress. Procedural disagreement blown out of proportion. Frank snorted when he heard. Coward's version of brave. Laura closed her eyes. She had expected it. Men like Reeves never ran. They repositioned. By evening, the pressure shifted. 2 unmarked cars parked across the street from Frank's garage and didn't leave. Another sat half a block from Laura's house, engine off, lights dark. Protection, they called it. Observation, it felt like. Caleb stayed in the garage. He slept on the couch in his office, boots on, phone in hand. Every sound woke him. Every shadow carried weight. At 2 in the morning, someone knocked. Not hard, not threatening, just enough to announce presence. Caleb was on his feet before the second knock. He moved quietly, peered through the office window. Laura stood outside, jacket pulled tight around her, hair still damp from the night air. No escort, no cruiser. Caleb opened the door. "You shouldn't be here." Laura stepped inside anyway. "Neither should you." Frank emerged from the back room, eyebrows raised. This is becoming a theme. Laura didn't sit. She paced, slow, measured. "They're pulling files," she said. "Old ones, cases that stalled, evidence that disappeared." Reeves wasn't alone. Caleb nodded. "He never is." "There's a pattern," Laura continued. "Small departments, rural roads, equipment rerouted then sold. Drugs moved through official channels. Anyone who noticed got transferred. Or scared. Or worse," Frank said. Laura stopped pacing. "Yes." Silence filled the room, thick and heavy. "They'll come for you next," Caleb said to her. "They already did," Laura replied. "They just haven't said it out loud yet." Frank folded his arms. "What are you thinking?" Laura looked at both of them. "I'm thinking the only reason I'm still breathing is because too many people saw what happened. Cameras, witnesses, noise." Caleb felt the truth of it settle in his chest. "Visibility," he said. Laura nodded. "We go quiet, we disappear. We stay visible, they have to move carefully." Frank sighed. "Careful men still kill people." "Yes," Laura said, "but not in daylight." The next morning, the town woke to fire. Not the biker hall, not yet. This time it was a storage unit on the edge of town, the one Caleb and Frank had photographed. By the time firefighters arrived, the building was already collapsing inward, smoke rolling into the pale sky. Official cause? Electrical. Unofficial truth? Erasure. Caleb stood behind the tape, face hard. Everything they had seen was gone. Ash, twisted metal, nothing left to prove what had been inside. Laura watched beside him, hands clenched. "They're destroying evidence." They're scared, Caleb replied. That's new. At noon, Reeves's lawyer held a press conference. He spoke of harassment, of false accusations, of dangerous vigilantes exploiting a tragedy. He never mentioned Laura's name. He mentioned Caleb's. Former biker. Questionable background. History of violence. The crowd murmured. Cameras turned. Laura stepped forward before anyone could stop her. I am Deputy Laura Bennett, she said, and that man saved my life. The noise stopped. She didn't shout. She didn't plead. She spoke clearly, evenly, every word deliberate. I was targeted because I reported missing equipment. My radio was disabled. My cruiser was forced off the road. Captain Reeves came to my bedside and told me to forget what I saw. Gasps rippled through the crowd. And when I didn't, Laura continued, he came to threaten us in person. I recorded it. The state has it. The FBI has it. This is no longer a rumor. Reeves' lawyer tried to interrupt. Cameras surged forward. Laura finished. If you want to know who the criminals are, stop looking at leather and start looking at badges. The statement hit like a dropped plate. Loud. Final. Impossible to ignore. That night, Frank's radio crackled with a call he hadn't heard in decades. Old voices, old names, men who had stayed quiet for too long. I saw that crash last year, one said. My brother got transferred after asking questions, another admitted. They took evidence out of my locker, a third confessed. The dam cracked. Caleb listened from the doorway as Frank took the calls, one after another, writing names, times, places on yellowed notepads. The story was growing larger than any of them. By dawn, Laura's house was surrounded by cameras. Support and hate mixed together in equal measure. She didn't step outside. She didn't need to. Caleb watched the sunrise from the garage roof, the town spread out below him. Familiar. Changed. He felt the weight of what he had started settle fully now. This was no longer about saving one woman on a dark road. This was about dragging something rotten into the light and standing there long enough for the world to see it. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He answered. You should have taken the warning, the voice said. Different from before. Colder. Caleb looked out over the town. You should have finished the job. A pause. Then a low laugh. We will. The call ended. Caleb didn't move. He didn't flinch. Below him, the town woke. Doors opened. Radios clicked on. People talked. And somewhere in that noise, the truth gathered momentum, heavy and unstoppable, ready to roll over anyone still standing in its way. The fire changed everything. By the next morning, the story no longer belonged to the county. State investigators sealed off the burned storage site. Federal vehicles arrived without sirens, quiet and deliberate. Men and women in plain jackets stepped through ash and twisted metal, their faces giving nothing away. What had been destroyed mattered less now than the fact that someone had rushed to destroy it. That kind of panic left fingerprints. Caleb Holt stood behind the tape with Frank, his sling tight, his ribs still aching every time he breathed too deeply. Across the blackened ground, an investigator lifted a half-melted metal tag with gloved fingers. He didn't look surprised. He looked confirmed. Laura Bennett arrived late, escorted this time. 2 state troopers flanked her, respectful but firm. Protection, officially. Containment, unofficially. She stopped beside Caleb, eyes fixed on the ruins. They burned it too fast, she said quietly. Frank nodded. Means they didn't expect us to talk. Laura's jaw tightened. They didn't expect anyone to. By noon, the FBI made it public. A joint task force, multi-county, long-term investigation. Carefully worded statements that said everything without committing to anything. Captain Reeves was no longer named directly, but everyone understood. His surrender had bought him time, not safety. The backlash came just as fast. Caleb's garage was vandalized before sunset. Spray paint across the roll-up door. Rat, snitch, cop lover. The words were crude, angry, aimed not at truth but at belonging. Frank scrubbed at them with thinner while Caleb watched, hands useless at his sides. "They want you isolated," Frank said. "Make you look like the exception." Caleb exhaled slowly. "I've been the exception my whole life." Laura faced something worse. Her phone exploded with messages, some supportive, many not. "Traitor! Disgrace! Should have died on the road!" Former colleagues stopped returning calls. Others sent short texts late at night, careful and vague. "I saw things too. I'm scared." She saved those. That evening, Laura stood in front of her bathroom mirror and studied her face. Bruises fading. Lines deeper than they had been a week ago. She barely recognized herself, not because she was broken, because she was no longer pretending. She picked up her badge from the counter, turned it over in her hands. She didn't put it on. Instead, she drove to the courthouse. The meeting was not public. No cameras, no speeches, a small room with old wood paneling, and men who had spent their careers deciding when to look away and when to act. Laura laid everything out. The recordings, the logs, the names Frank had collected, the calls, the threats, the patterns that stretched back years, crossing jurisdictions like scars. When she finished, no one spoke for a long moment. Finally, a judge with white hair and tired eyes leaned forward. "You understand," he said, "that this ends your career." Laura nodded. "It already ended. I just hadn't admitted it yet." He studied her, then glanced at the file in front of him. "You also understand this won't stop with Reeves." "I'm counting on it," she replied. "I want it bigger." That night, Caleb dreamed of headlights. He woke before dawn, heart racing, sweat cold on his back. For a second, he didn't know where he was. Then the garage ceiling came into focus, the sound of Frank's old radio murmuring somewhere in the background. The radio crackled louder. "Unit responding to a structure fire," the dispatcher said. "Possible casualties." Caleb was on his feet before the address finished. The biker hall was already gone when they arrived. Flames tore through the old building, devouring wood, banners, photographs that had outlived men who hadn't made it home from wars and roads and bad years. Firefighters worked frantically, but the blaze had been fed. Accelerant, plenty of it. Men stood in the street, leather vests streaked with soot, faces hollow. One knelt on the curb, hands over his head. Another shouted until his voice broke. Sirens wailed, but they sounded distant, unreal. Caleb felt something inside him split open. Laura arrived moments later, escorted again, but this time she pushed past them. The heat hit her like a wall. She scanned the chaos, panic sharp in her chest. She found Caleb standing still, staring at the burning wreckage, fists clenched at his sides. "I'm sorry," she said. The words felt useless even as she spoke them. He didn't look at her. "They waited," he said, "until it would hurt." A beam collapsed inward, sending sparks into the night. Someone screamed a name. Frank emerged from the smoke, coughing, face blackened. He shook his head slowly. "Everyone's out," he said, "but it's gone." Laura felt tears burn behind her eyes. "This is because of me." Caleb finally turned. His eyes were hard but not accusing. "No," he said. "This is because they're losing." The fire took hours to die. By the time dawn broke, there was nothing left but smoldering ruins and men who had nowhere to go but forward. The response was immediate. By mid-morning, bikers from neighboring counties rolled in. Not angry, purposeful. They didn't block roads, they didn't shout. They stood shoulder to shoulder, silent, bearing witness. Across the street, cameras gathered again. This time, no one needed to explain what they were seeing. Laura stepped in front of them. "They burned a building," she said into the microphones, voice steady despite the ache in her chest. "They didn't burn the truth, and they didn't burn the people who stood up." She didn't name Reeves. She didn't need to. By afternoon, arrests began quietly, not dramatic, not public. One contractor, one logistics supervisor, a county clerk. Men who had assumed the system would protect them because it always had. Caleb watched it unfold from the edge of the crowd, exhaustion settling deep into his bones. The hall was gone. The life he had built around its walls was gone with it. Laura found him sitting on the curb, staring at a half-burned photograph someone had pulled from the debris. Men smiling, younger, alive. "They'll rebuild," she said. He shook his head. "Not the same." She sat beside him. "Maybe better." He looked at her then. Really looked. "What did it cost you?" She answered honestly. "Everything I thought I was." He nodded once. "Fair trade." That evening, as the crowd thinned and the smoke drifted away, a federal agent approached them. "We're moving forward," she said. "Full indictments. RICO. This doesn't stop." Caleb stood slowly. Pain flared. He ignored it. "Good," he said, "because neither do we." As night fell again, quieter this time, the town felt different, raw, awake. And somewhere beyond the burned hall, beyond the fear and the loss, the story crossed a line it could never uncross. It was no longer about survival, it was about reckoning. The courtroom smelled like old wood, paper, and the faint bitterness of coffee that had gone cold hours earlier. It was the kind of room that had heard every lie a man could tell himself and kept none of them secret. Caleb Holt sat on the hard bench behind the railing, his sling gone now, his arms stiff and aching but usable. He wore a clean jacket Frank had insisted on. No leather, no patches. Just a man who looked older than he had a month ago, and steadier because of it. Around him sat faces he recognized and faces he didn't. Retired deputies, firefighters, a few bikers who had chosen plain coats instead of cuts, understanding how optics worked in rooms like this. Laura Bennett sat 2 rows ahead, back straight, hands folded in her lap. Her badge was not clipped to her belt. It rested in her purse, heavy as a stone she hadn't decided whether to carry or throw into deep water. She hadn't slept much since the fire. None of them had. Captain Reeves stood at the defense table. Without the uniform, he looked smaller, older. The confidence was still there, but it had nowhere to hide now. His lawyer leaned close, whispering. Reeves nodded once, jaw tight. The judge entered. Everyone rose. Everyone sat. The prosecutor began without drama, no grandstanding, just facts. Dates, phone records, vehicle logs, disabled radios, rerouted shipments, burned storage units, a burned biker hall that had finally forced the truth into daylight. When Laura's name was called, the room shifted. She walked to the stand slowly, aware of every step, every eye. She raised her right hand, swore the oath, and sat. Her voice was steady when she spoke. Not loud, not emotional, just clear. She described the shipment she had flagged, the serial numbers that didn't match, the pressure to let it go, the crash, the dead radio, the dark truck with no lights, the hospital visit from Reeves, the words he had chosen carefully, the way they were meant to sound like concern while closing every door. When she finished, the prosecutor asked one final question. "Why didn't you stop?" Laura looked at the judge, then at the jury, then briefly at Caleb. "Because if I stopped," she said, "someone else would have ended up on that road." The defense tried. They suggested confusion, trauma, bias, the influence of outsiders with questionable histories. They said Caleb Holt's presence tainted everything. Caleb listened without moving, jaw set. He had expected this. It still stung. Then it was his turn. He walked to the stand and sat, shoulders squared. He told them about the rain, the badge in the gravel, the pulse that almost wasn't there, the call that didn't go through, the men who came because they knew how to keep someone alive until help arrived. He described the threats, the truck, the fire, the hall burning while men stood outside watching their history turn to ash. The defense asked why he hadn't just kept riding. Caleb didn't hesitate. "Because that's how people die quietly," he said. There were no objections. When the jury returned, they did not take long. Guilty. The word landed heavy. Reeves closed his eyes, just for a second. When he opened them again, something in him had gone flat. The sentence followed. Long, detailed, unforgiving. Conspiracy, abuse of authority, obstruction, lives endangered, trust violated. As Reeves was led away, he turned once, scanning the room. His eyes met Laura's, then Caleb's. There was no apology there, only calculation, already searching for angles that no longer existed. Outside, cameras waited. Reporters shouted questions. Laura stepped forward before anyone else could. This wasn't about bikers versus police, she said. It was about right versus wrong. And that line doesn't care what uniform you wear. She didn't stay. She walked past the microphones, down the courthouse steps, and into the sunlight. Caleb followed at a distance. He watched her pause at the bottom, take a breath, and keep going. By evening, the town gathered again. Not in anger, not in celebration, in quiet recognition. The burned hall site had been cleared, the rubble pushed aside. In its place, a temporary frame stood, marked with chalk lines and measurements. People brought food, coffee, lumber, tools. No speeches, just work. Caleb stood at the edge, watching men and women move together without asking who belonged and who didn't. He felt the loss keenly. He also felt something else. Possibility. Laura joined him, holding 2 cups of coffee. She handed him one. "I resigned this morning," she said. He looked at her. "You sure?" She nodded. "I don't know how to be part of a system that only works when people bleed to fix it." He considered that. "What will you do?" She looked out at the frame rising from the ground. "Something that doesn't let people fall through cracks." Caleb took a sip. The coffee was terrible. He didn't mind. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in bruised colors that slowly softened. Engines rumbled in the distance, not loud, not threatening, familiar now, almost comforting. The reckoning had come. It had cost them, all of them. But as the first beam was lifted into place and hands reached up together to steady it, Caleb understood something he hadn't on that rain-soaked road. Justice didn't arrive like a siren. It arrived like this, slow, heavy, built by people who refused to look away. The engines did not roar that morning. They murmured low and steady, like men who had learned that strength did not need to announce itself anymore. Caleb Holt stood at the edge of Main Street with his hands resting on the handlebars, watching the town wake up around him. Storefront lights flicked on one by one. A bakery door opened. Coffee steam curled into the cold air. A year ago, people would have pulled their kids closer at the sight of leather and chrome. Today, they waved. Laura Bennett stepped out of the rebuilt community center and paused on the steps. The building still smelled like fresh wood and paint. The sign above the door caught the morning light. Simple lettering, no symbols that divided, only a name chosen by the town together. She adjusted the collar of her jacket, not a uniform, not leather, just a woman who had decided who she was without anyone telling her. She scanned the street and found Caleb immediately, the way people do when something unspoken binds them. The mayor finished her brief remarks without applause. None was needed. This was not a ceremony, it was a continuation. When she stepped aside, Laura moved forward, her voice carrying without strain. She spoke about accountability, about choosing to stay present when leaving would be easier, about how the truth rarely feels heroic while you are paying for it. She did not mention Captain Reeves by name. She did not need to. The town understood. Caleb listened, feeling the weight of the past year settle differently in his chest. Loss had not vanished. It had changed shape. The burned hall still lived behind his eyes when he closed them, but it no longer defined the horizon. When Laura finished, she stepped down and walked straight toward him. No hesitation, no space left for doubt. She stopped beside his bike and rested her hand lightly on the seat, a gesture small enough to be private, clear enough to be seen. "Ready," she said. He nodded. The engines came alive, not all at once, but in a wave that rolled gently down the street. Police cruisers eased into position at the front and rear, lights off, presence quiet. Children lined the sidewalks holding handmade flags. Some were crooked, some spelled words wrong. No one corrected them. Caleb eased the clutch and the procession began to move. As they passed the courthouse, Caleb glanced at the steps where the verdict had been read months earlier. He remembered the smell of old wood, the way Reeves' eyes had searched for exits that no longer existed. Justice had not been clean. It had been earned inch by inch, paid for with reputation, with safety, with sleep. Laura rode behind him, arms steady around his waist, not holding on out of fear, but balance. She watched the town through different eyes now. She saw not institutions, but people. Not sides, but choices. When they passed the stretch of road where she had been found bleeding, she closed her eyes for a moment. The memory rose and passed. It no longer owned her. The ride ended at the community center. Engines shut down. Silence settled, comfortable and earned. People gathered, talking in low clusters, sharing food, stories, plans. A retired deputy stood beside a man in worn denim, explaining how to fix a loose step. A biker knelt to tie a child's shoe. No one pointed. No one whispered. Inside, the walls were already filling. Photos from the rebuild, names of volunteers written in marker. A schedule for support meetings, mentoring nights, open garage hours where kids could learn how engines worked instead of learning how to be afraid of them. Caleb leaned against the doorway, watching Laura talk with an older woman who clutched her hand like she might not let go. He recognized that look. Gratitude mixed with relief, the kind that comes when someone tells you that what you went through mattered. A reporter approached him cautiously, recorder visible but lowered. "Do you ever regret stopping that night?" she asked. Caleb looked past her, out to the street, to the place where a decision had cracked his life open. He answered without drama. "Regret is for things you did wrong," he said. "I did what I could live with." She nodded and stepped back, understanding when not to press. As the afternoon wore on, the crowd thinned. People returned to routines that no longer felt quite the same. The sun dipped, casting long shadows that stretched but did not threaten. Laura sat on the steps beside Caleb, both of them quiet, sharing the kind of silence that does not need filling. "I used to think justice was a place," Laura said finally, "a building, a badge, a process. And now," Caleb said, "and now I think it's a decision you make every day," she said, "and sometimes you make it alone. Sometimes you make it together." Caleb smiled, small and real. He reached into his pocket and handed her a folded piece of paper. She opened it and read the simple words written there. The same words that had been left under her mat months earlier, now framed and ready to hang inside the center. "Thank you for seeing the man, not the patch." She swallowed and nodded. Evening settled in. The lights inside the center glowed warm against the darkening sky. Somewhere down the street, a motorcycle rumbled past. Just one, just passing through. No one flinched. Caleb stood and swung a leg over his bike. Laura rose and faced him. There was no grand promise between them, no need. What they had built did not rely on vows. It relied on presence. He started the engine, paused, then looked back at the crowd still lingering in the doorway, at the town that had learned something about itself the hard way. If this story moved you, don't forget to like and subscribe, and tell us what you think in the comments with 3 words.